After 7 o'clock into the Situation Room for the second week of April. And this Monday morning, we are getting into conversations that matter, conversations that grasp our attention and that actually then need some more attention when it comes to doing something about those particular issues. And the one that we'll have this morning is not a far cry from that at all. And we'll get into that in just a minute after CT tells us what's in his pocket.
Well, my pocket has many things.
This I know.
But the thing that would be of interest to you is something that not only helps you in understanding that spending doesn't have to be a one-way street. Spending can actually be a two-way street, believe it or not. And what am I referring to? I am referring to the I&M Bank Global Card. Mm-hmm. Now, what exactly is this World Credit MasterCard? This World Credit MasterCard by I&M is a card that enables you to spend while at the same time gaining points as you spend. The points you gain are referred to as Milele points. Mm-hmm. Now, these Milele points, when accumulated, enable you to again spend, buy fuel, buy groceries, buy airline tickets if you wish to fly, etc. etc. And all you need to do is go to the I&M on the go platform to register. But before I finish, let me just give you just a little icing on the cake. If you happen to be the 20th individual to register, you will stand a chance of winning 50,000 Milele points. Now, I didn't say this, I'll say it now. 1 Milele point equals 1 shilling.
Beautiful.
So if you get 50,000 Milele points, it means you have 50,000 Kenya shillings worth of points for you to spend.
Okay.
Yes.
You also need to get this thing in your pocket, if you ask me.
Yes.
All right. So you can earn, spend. It's a beautiful cycle, essentially, with I&M, the World MasterCard. Okay. So we're getting into a conversation this morning, and I'm already breathing out, but we're going to get into it properly. The Senator for Busia County, Okiya Omutatah, is
from.
We had this conversation before.
You said,
and I said, and I actually said it right before, didn't I?
You said from,
yeah.
And you were told no.
Okay,
yes.
The Senator from Busia County is...
If I were you, I'd be safe. The Senator from Busia County.
The Senator from Busia County, because that's where he's from. Okiya Omutatah is here with us this morning. Good morning, Senator.
Morning.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty fine.
Pretty fine.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a good place to start this Monday, I'd say. So before we even tell folks, why you're here this morning, let's welcome you to the Situation Room in proper style. CT is in another country this week. He'll let you know where that is and the proverb, and then you can do us the good favor of interpreting that for us, right?
Okay.
I am actually in one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. But because of the incidences and the issues that some refer to as the curse of this continent, has never actually been able to realize that wealth to the benefits of its citizenry. This country is Zimbabwe. The proverb for the day is a proverb I've mentioned before because I actually like this particular proverb. Until the lion tells his side of the story will always glorify the hunter.
Yeah. And it's always said that victory is always written by
the victors.
Yes. So the story they tell is their story. But maybe we could look at an interesting story Achebe told of the tortoise and the leopard. Said the tortoise used to move around the forest, claiming that if he can floor the leopard with one blow, he can beat the leopard to a pulp. So one evening, the leopard runs into the tortoise and tells him, Mr. Tortoise, here I am.
Beat me.
Can beat me. And tortoise said, okay, that's a small thing, just wait. So the tortoise begins knocking down trees, turning over boulders and rearranging the scene. Then when he finished arranging the scene and destroying, then he lay on that place and told the leopard, you can now kill me. Then the leopard says, why? He says, whoever finds me dead on this scene will know that you met your equal. So the leopard ran away because he did not want to to destroy his record as the most fierce animal in the forest. So that is a story whereby sometimes you have to define victory. You don't let others define victory for you. And so when the whole story is not told until the lion tells his side of the story, you end up with half-truths and tunneled view of things. Sometimes a keyhole view, not even a tunneled view, a keyhole view of things. And sometimes you'll find when you're having this tunneled view, you could be celebrating that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and as they say, it could be a train which is coming over to crash you.
Exactly. And that's the light that you're seeing.
The light you're seeing, the headlamp of the train.
Coming towards
Towards you.
Indeed. Well, there you go. So, no matter how thin you slice it, a story always has two sides.
Yeah.
And we're looking at sides of stories this morning. But one of the things, and that for which you're here this morning, to be able to open up for us, according to research and data collection that you have actually made, Senator, we start to have this conversation this morning, and it's around issues of odious debt. It's around issues of a Eurobond that comes due in a very, very short number of months. And we're looking at, let's just say this number, I think it's important that we do. 919,450,000,000 shillings. That's the same as 7.1 billion US dollars. It's the current exchange rate at 129, which was borrowed in the financial years of 2014, 2015, 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, and 2020, 2021. We also have an additional 208,324,847,510, and this was borrowed in February 2024. Now, this is money that is owed by Kenya and is up for paying back. Now, for matters of clarification, the money that was borrowed in February 2024 was for the purposes of paying back another Eurobond, which was the initial Eurobond. So that money was borrowed, essentially borrowed from Peter to pay Paul. And that happened. Now, under the Constitution, the parameters with which Kenya is allowed to borrow is for development. Now, the question then comes in, and as we start to have this conversation, can we see development for these monies that was borrowed between the years of 2014 and 2024? That's over 10 years. Kenya's current debt, which is being called odious debt in some quarters, is amounting to 13,114,602,305 Kenya shillings. Senator,
yes,
you've called this, many quarters have called this odious debt. Odious debt, in simple terms, essentially means that Kenya actually doesn't owe this money.
Yeah, you don't owe this money.
Kenya doesn't owe this money, and we're going to start from looking at the mysteries around this Eurobond money, and how can we then say that such huge numbers, which Kenya borrowed, we see the evidence of the borrowing, but where it went to, we are not quite sure. Why are we calling this odious debt?
Yes, I think, first of all, the law defines how we should borrow and how money should be used. And also, now that we have begun with the Eurobond, if you look at table 5 of the computations I've shared, which is on table 5 is on page 11 of that document, it will show you, this is an extract from the government books on development expenditure, budget and statement of public debt. So when you look at that document on page 11, I've looked at those financial years when the Eurobond was borrowed. If you look at, go ahead, that's page number 5, you could, When you get there, you look at the 2014, 2015, the gross development expenditure was 494 And that expenditure, 494 billion, that expenditure, 358 billion was paid from taxes, 136 billion was loans. So if you add this, if you add the second column, if you add the third column and the fourth column, that's tax revenue plus external loans, you get the development expenditure fully covered. But then you look at the Eurobonds that were borrowed, you see they were never factored into the government books. So the 175 billion that was initially borrowed, 207 billion, 214 billion, 113 billion, all this money does not get into the development budget. So why is this money? Because from the government books themselves, you can see that the budget, the development was taken care of by tax revenue and external loans, and the loans are given. Now, where did the Eurobond money go?
Let's just go over that again,
yes,
Senator. So essentially what we are saying here is that there were certain development projects that were supposed to take place.
Yes.
These development projects took place and
Yes.
they were paid for
Yes.
from taxpayers' money because we
Yes.
can see that money there.
Yes.
They were also taken care of by
The loans that were in the budget.
loans that were already in the budget.
Yeah, approved
which
by
is said-
Parliament.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, when you bring in the Eurobond,
Yes.
these monies essentially under the borrowing that you mentioned
Yes.
were actually supposed to take care of certain development
Yes.
projects, but we don't see that money has
Yes.
been applied to any project.
None, it didn't go to any project.
Okay.
So that's one of the issues that you have, and that one clearly shows that. Number two is that the Constitution controls how money is to be borrowed. And that borrowing is, when you look at Article 202 of the Constitution, it requires that any loan must be in the budget. And the reason for that is that loans are paid from taxes. But you have gotten some madness which has come in, and I use the word madness deliberately, that came into the National Assembly, and they came up with this thing called debt ceiling, which is just arrant nonsense. That you are computing debt against the GDP of a country. GDP really means nothing. GDP could mean that maybe that wealth is in hands of maybe 10% of the population. 90% of the wealth could be in the hands of 10% of the population.
True.
And when you tax them, you're only going to tax them 30%. So that GDP that translates really to nothing. So usually taxes, debts are paid from loans. And the idea of a debt ceiling, you have to go back to about 1914, up to 1917, when the First World War was on, and the American government got involved and did not have time for Congress to be sitting to approve the budget. So they said, okay, go ahead, spend on need.
Yes.
When the war ended, Congress came back and said, okay, how much have you spent? So they found that then they calculated that as against their GDP and said, we are going to give you that debt ceiling. And that particular problem is what has created the huge debt. America is heavily indebted. It's a heavily indebted country because they have never been able to go back to a state whereby Congress controls borrowing. Since the World War, then the Second World War also happened, that thing went on. That's why you find that they keep on going, they get to a point where they're about to shut down government, they have again to do this and
Yes.
that. So they have never gone back to the initial design whereby Congress, as the controller of the purse, was the one which allowed borrowing. They left it to the executive. So we go ahead and borrow that bad manners that have destroyed America and come here and put in our laws that 55% of our debt will be pegged on 55% of GDP. And then the executive now begins playing with that 55%, saying, okay, we are borrowing within 55%. But the law is very clear that any borrowing must be in the budget. That's Article 220, Clause 1, B and C.
Are you saying it shouldn't matter then? They shouldn't. Then you don't. If according to what you're saying, if it is in the budget, then a ceiling wouldn't matter.
No, you don't require a ceiling because in the budget you have to demonstrate the capacity to pay.
So once you've been able to demonstrate that,
Yes.
then you shouldn't have a problem with the
Yes.
ceiling.
So you have to have a balance to pay, and that's why they say that the budget must have revenue and expenditure.
Okay.
So you must show your revenue and then your expenditure. That's 220. The first line, A1A is you have revenue and expenditure. So when they say you must create a balanced budget, then within that budget, the control mechanisms are inbuilt in the budget and Parliament approves.
Okay.
So the executive does not have a blank check to go borrowing the way Parliament has done by fixing a debt ceiling, which goes against the constitutional design of how government should borrow.
And this revenue that we speak of, is it actual revenue or anticipated revenue?
It's anticipated revenue, usually, it's estimates. Budgets are usually based on estimates.
Yes, and these estimates, the budget must also indicate how the government intends to raise this revenue.
Yes, it must indicate how it intends to raise this revenue. And that's why they say, in fact, if you look at... there's a document I shared that if you can open it, that one, the statement of actual revenue, the Gazette notice. If you go to the first page, you'll be able to see.
We'll find it. Yeah.
I had shared it with the.
We have it.
Yeah, if you open the Gazette notice, that which gives us a statement of how the government's money is sitting at as at 25th of February 2025. And it was signed in law by Mr. Mbadi, you realize that the country is not doing very well from that statement. But again, within that statement, you'll also see that if you are keen, you'll notice how reckless our government can be. And I'm going just to point out one thing whereby the money was recklessly spent, and then you'd look at what was happening at that time in the political sphere, and people have been asking questions, how did you finance this, how did you finance that? But if you go into this document, you can easily see that circumstantial evidence points at this particular exercise.
What page was that, Senator?
No, it's a different document called Gazette Notice.
The Gazette Notice, exactly,
yes. Yeah. If you look at, that's okay. So when you look at that Gazette Notice, you will notice that it has got an open, on the right-hand side, there's an opening balance, there's tax revenue, which I've highlighted.
Yeah.
Now, there's an estimated tax revenue of 2.7 trillion, which is revised to 2.4 trillion. But look at how much has been collected at the end of February, only 1.4 trillion.
1.4.
So we are doing very badly on that. Now, the non-tax revenue, these are the things that come from the dividends of various operations. Now, when you come to domestic borrowing, you'll realize that the entire amount is not in the budget. The entire amount of domestic borrowing, if you go look at the budget that the Parliament passed, there's nowhere Parliament has allowed the executive to borrow. Domestically. There's nowhere. The only thing that is allowed by law is the treasury bills, which are like overdrafts, that should be paid within the year. It's like a bank overdraft, whereby if the government is having a cash flow problem, then it has to go to the market and borrow some money. But once KRA has collected the money and remitted, they pay back immediately.
So yes, go ahead and do.
But we often hear, coming from the CS, during the budget, because we listen from beginning to end, that we hear that when the numbers have been given in terms of what it is that they would like to do as per the budget, and then when we hear where this money will come from, because they do make a statement about that before the appropriations bill comes later, and they do talk about domestic borrowing. So what I'm hearing you saying, Senator, is that they can say it, but if it is not documented, then it means nothing. Because when you look at
Article 109, it says that Parliament shall exercise its legislative authority through bills introduced in Parliament and approved by Parliament and signed into law by the President.
Not statements made.
Not statements.
Okay.
Parliament doesn't work on statements, on motions, on whatever. So when the budget policy statement, they're supposed to be a guideline. But you need to have that revenue declared in the budget. Then we can see what it is. So we need to see the domestic borrowing, because the reason why they don't declare that borrowing has to be tied on a project.
Okay. So this money that we're talking about, I think is important. This money that we're talking about now, this 828 billion.
Yes. Which they have raised, they revised upwards to 978 billion.
Okay.
In the third column.
It was revised to 978 billion.
Yes. And then
essentially we are saying that we don't know where this money went, but we can see that it was borrowed. And when we talk about domestic borrowing, we're talking about local banks and such.
Yes.
So where would this money have gone?
But you're also saying, that this money, if it was borrowed locally, was not in the budget.
Exactly.
It was not in the budget.
It was not.
So if it wasn't in the budget, then how did the government go about the process of actually...
Who gave an authority?
Yes, because Parliament gives that authority. Yes, meaning it is passed in the budget. If it isn't passed in the budget, so where did the authority come from for this borrowing to take place?
And pegged on that, when you go to a local bank, for example, call it, because we know that they all do, I mean, take your pick. Does the bank require a documentation of authority for borrowing from government before they give these funds? Is that a requirement?
I don't know if they require that, but the bank is out to make profit. And these things are, but government is the most secure thing to give money for profit. So they come, not just banks, when the scandal gets further, but you find that parastatals, which have been funded by the treasury, are lending government money. The money they have been financed with, they go and lend it back to government.
To itself.
To itself.
By indicating by participating in the buying of these legal the legal paper that the government issues.
And then the tragedy is that the legal paper is supposed to be an overdraft to be paid back in 12 months. But if you look at our documents, there's even one that is written pre-1997. Pre-1997 overdraft. Now, how can an overdraft be pre-1997? That's 27 years ago. And it's a huge figure. I'll show you in these things. But before we go, look at external loans and grants. That one is now in the budget. But look at the first column. The Parliament approved 571 billion to be borrowed. But look at the executive and the supplementary have revised it to 593. Who gave them the power to do that?
So if there was any revision, that meant it
has to go
come back
to Parliament. Yes. And now, of course, I borrowed that. Now, there's a... Now, I want to take you to another... To go down. I think it is on page... And that is why I want to show you some scam. This, if you go to page 3.
Of the Gazette?
Yes, of the Gazette. You see... These are the repayment of the public debt. Consolidated Fund Services, CFS. You go down. Yeah, the highlighted. You have the CFS 50, that's the public debt being repaid. There was an estimate of 1.9 trillion to repay the debt. And now, remember how much have we raised up there? In taxes, about 1.4.
1.4 trillion.
Yes.
So, but now we have paid about out of that, we have paid 928 to debt.
Billion.
Yes. From our taxes. We have raised about 1.4 and about $1 trillion that's going to pay debt.
And we can see, sorry, Senator, we can see the trail that this money that has left and you can trace that this money that has left has actually come from the collection of taxes.
Yeah, from the collection of taxes.
Okay.
Now, look, I wanted to show you one thing. The CFS 52, the third item, salaries, allowances, and miscellaneous. Now, salaries, allowances, and miscellaneous are usually fixed figure.
Yes.
And here it is. The initial estimate is 4.209, 674, 431. Adjustment remains the same figure.
Yes.
But how much has been paid?
22
billion.
Where did the extra 18 come from?
It has come from your taxes. But what was happening around this time in Kenya? This is the time when Raila was running for the AU seat. And I'm suspecting that this is the money, this is where the money that financed Raila came from.
Hang on a minute.
But Senator, you talk about salaries and allowances being a fixed figure.
Yes.
Here we talk about the extra 18.
Yes.
Which no one knows where it came from.
No, it came from the salary.
No, it came
from the taxes. But who authorized and what did it do?
The additional.
What did this 18 billion shillings do?
So 18 billion shillings which existed was spent.
Has been spent.
Has been spent.
The limit that had been set was 4 billion.
4 billion.
But 22 billion has been spent.
So and the question we're asking
and we are talking of salaries and allowances. These are fixed figures. Salaries and allowances. And that's why even the estimates are not revised.
And our salaries and allowances are a fixed figure of
4.2 trillion.
But the thing is here that even when an adjustment was made, according to what you're saying, Senator, so there's the budget number, then give or take a few things may happen. So you do an adjustment.
And you know that
with the adjustment, the figure remained the same.
Yes.
Now when you go to the actual
So
spend,
then what did you adjust?
Well,
Nothing was
nothing was
nothing
adjusted
was
because
adjusted.
it's
Nothing
fixed.
changed.
That's usually fixed.
It's fixed
Usually
because you
fixed.
have people who work in different government
you know.
departments.
You
You're
know
not
them.
adding 100 people. You know who they are.
Yes.
You know what their salary is. It's a certain number, so you're able to put that in based on those numbers. So the question is here that how did this jump then from 4 billion to 22 billion within the same year? And we cannot see the requisite action for which that 18 billion shillings now is in this paper.
Like, for instance, we didn't see a surge in employment.
You didn't,
Yeah.
you didn't
So
hire
that-
an extra 1,000 people into government.
Yes.
No, we didn't see that, did we?
Yeah.
No.
So this money, and this is the time when Raila was running around the continent. And I've got, my suspicion is that this is where how he got financed. They used this vote head to finance Raila. Because they have not explained where. Because if you look at the budget, there was no budget for hiring jets, for doing all these things. Where did this money come from?
Let's take a break at this point because I think it's interesting. It's rather not just interesting, but it's also important for us. And if there was to be some kind of traceability in terms of where this money then actually did go, and then what should be the explainer that then comes from Treasury, because this is right in the lap of the Treasury, that where did this money actually go? We're talking this morning about odious debt, and we're looking at the numbers that just don't seem to add up. The senator from Busia County, Okiya Omutatah, is our guest this hour. We're looking at some of these issues, and we're going to come back. Some definitions are required, of course, for us to hear exactly as we go towards the Eurobond story. But we're just looking at monies that seem to have been borrowed domestically, paid for by your taxes, but we're not quite sure where this money actually went. We continue with this conversation when we come back. It's 25 minutes to 8 o'clock. We continue after this, taking a look at weather and traffic. Don't go away. It's 7:35.
Peekaboo! Ready to come out of your hiding closet this school break holiday? The Standard
And questions of 18 billion shillings and where did it actually go? And we're looking at current numbers. We're not looking at historics. In terms of 20 or 10 years ago, we're looking at 2024, 2025. The senator from Busia County is our guest this hour, and into the next. As we look at some of these numbers, the big numbers that Kenya has to pay back every year or so. And we're asking ourselves the question, these numbers, Senator, are on public record.
Yeah.
They're on public record. And the question is, why would I hide a bump of 18 billion shillings in clear sight, in plain sight, for anybody to see?
Well, I think that somebody is doing his work by keeping the record. And so it's up to us to make use of that record. The best some of these people can do is to say this is how things are. Then it's up to us to go and pick up this. And these statements are published every month.
Yeah.
This is the latest of February. The one for March has not come out. This is the latest statement we have. So you find people asking a lot of questions in the media and whatever, and yet the government is publishing these things. If you just take your time, pick them up and try to understand the law against the facts, then you begin seeing an unraveling of the realities before you see everything in black and white. And I just brought this up to demonstrate a simple issue so that the figures we are trying to mention, we are going to mention, people can understand that these figures are possible because they look impossible to the uninitiated. They look impossible. You talk of an odious debt of 13 trillion, many people will shut up. The mind shuts up, feels that you are telling them lies.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, that this is like a small section, you can see a bump of 18 billion has just been snatched from nowhere. You have seen domestic borrowings of very huge amounts of money that is not approved by Parliament. It's not tied to any project. It's just going like that. Then you can now, when you go now to look at the global picture of the debt, I've demonstrated that all the Eurobonds in those years when they were borrowed, the budget was balanced, paid by taxes and loans approved in the budget, but somebody was taking the Eurobonds. Where has this $7 billion US gone?
Okay.
It's not in our records.
I want to hold on to this 18 billion that we talk about, because
Yes.
essentially what we're saying is that 18 billion shillings has been spent.
Yes.
We do not know what it was spent on. It's saying that it was spent on salaries and
Yeah.
remuneration,
Yeah.
which normally is fixed.
Yeah.
If that was the case, the number before that would have been something at least close to 20.
Yeah, you have adjusted
would have
it.
been adjusted.
Yes.
That didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
We're seeing a couple of comments, and of course, we're bringing in our audiences to all of these conversations that we have. And one person has said, "What? Well, we hired 100,000 teachers, or we said to have hired 100,000 teachers along those lines in phases. Is it not possible that some of the new things that we are bringing in could attribute to this spend?"
No, there's no new thing being brought in. This
Okay.
4 billion is projected
Okay.
to cover all those hirings, whatever. They don't hire outside whatever. It's not.
After
Yeah,
the
exactly.
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what was supposed to be projected to be sent at that point.
Right. So there is no explanation for this.
And please, Ministry of Health has its own. Ministry of Education has its own budget. TSC has its own budget. These ones are the charges of the consolidated fund. These are salaries like of judges. I think I need to clarify that. These are CFS salaries. Salaries of state officers.
Right. Commissions.
You have not added judges. You have not added commissioners. You have not added anything. And their allowances. These are not salaries of the ordinary worker. Like teachers, like whatever. No.
Yes.
These are salaries that are direct charges on the consolidated fund of state officers. Not salaries of government employees.
Yes.
That's why there are only 4 billion.
Because if they were everybody else,
yes,
they would have been
much
much bigger.
Yeah, that's why there are only 4 billion. This is a fixed charge that doesn't even go to Parliament for approval. It's a CFS. A CFS stands for Consolidated Fund Services.
Why doesn't it go to Parliament for approval?
Because the Constitution has already said the salaries of judges and whatever will be paid from the Consolidated Fund. Direct. So Parliament only, when you look at Article 221 of the Constitution, I think it is Section 6, it says that after the estimates have been consolidated, Parliament shall make an appropriation act excluding these ones. In the Constitution, you exclude this from the budget because there are non-figures, there are fixed figures, and have already been determined. Like repayment of debt, they say debt will be, if you go to Article 214, says that public debt will be a direct charge on the consolidated fund. So it doesn't require appropriation. The people have already appropriated.
The due date comes, it is for
Yeah, it is for it.
So it does not require
Yes.
any other activity.
So what you need to understand in this scam is that these are salaries of state officers, not even MCS, not even MPs. These are category of state officers whose salaries are a direct charge, like judges,
Which means,
like commissioners.
which means, Senator, if we were to spend the extra 18, that would have meant we see close to 4 times the number of new state officers.
You need 4 times the number of new state officers. That's why I'm flagging it out as a big fraud on the people of Kenya. And it's here in plain sight.
Now, the monies that were collected by the Revenue Authority, as we have seen in this year so far, has been almost 1.4 trillion.
Yes.
And if we're seeing that monies that have been spent so far, the majority of that spend has gone towards the payment of debt. Because we know that's the first charge.
Yeah, about a trillion. About a trillion.
About $1 trillion has been spent on debt. Now, can we see who these debts were paid to?
Yeah, you can go down to most of these debts that were being paid. You need to look at another document that the Treasury usually publishes to show who the debts were. But when you go back to the original government, the original document that we were having, if you go back to that document, there's a place I have displayed, but I'm making a different argument, which is on page 7 of the original document. That was external funding listed by donors for the 2014-2015 year. It's not the current one, it's the 2014-2015 year. So when you look at that, you'll see that the government of Belgium gave 800 billion in A&A, none in revenue, like that. It goes down and down. If you go further down until the end, it will tell you which ministry got what. Because under the Kenyan law, it's ministries which borrow.
Yes.
Okay. So the ministry comes up with its budget, with its proposal, then it's given, then it's consolidated at the Treasury and taken to Parliament for approval. But it's the ministries which borrow. So this particular figure is given, and you can be able to know which debts are being paid by looking at the whatever. But the law is that all debts are a direct charge on the consolidated fund.
Should we be able to see very clearly that X amount of dollars came into Kenya, for example,
Yes.
under development,
Yes.
and these are the projects for which those dollars were spent?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clearly put out. In fact, when you look at the budget, the budget begins from the ground. It's a program-based budget in Kenya.
Yes.
So each of those borrowed loans are tied to projects, and you can see those projects. Whether the projects are executed well or not is a different thing. And I think you have been seeing some people, including my young friend Morara, has occasionally shown that the execution of this money was allocated in the budget, but this project is not running. That's a different story. Here we are looking at theft on the side of revenue, not on the side of expenditure. Theft through the budget. When you talk of budgeted corruption.
Yeah.
Yes. So this money is usually approved, it's usually tied to projects, and you can be able to follow from the budget. You can go down and follow each project and audit it. And that's what the work the Auditor General is supposed to be doing. And so what I was looking here, what I was trying to demonstrate here is the fact that from my figures, Kenya does not have a debt.
How? You've just told us, Senator, that they have been under each, that ministries are the ones who borrow Kenya.
Yes.
And that you will then be able to see that monies having come in can be applied to different ministries, and that you will
Yes.
then be able to see in documentation
Yes.
what projects then received or would have received money.
Yes.
How
And
do we then say that Kenya doesn't owe
the
if
reason I'm
you
saying
can
that
see
is
those
very
lines?
simple. The reason I'm saying that is very simple. From my research, you will find that when President Kibaki left office, the public debt was about 2.7 trillion. When you look at the various appropriation acts over the last 10 years, from 2014 to November 30th last year, 2024, you find that Parliament approved about 2.3 trillion, which really fits in our borrowing culture. 2.7 handed over from the 50 years.
Yeah, 2.3, yeah.
2.3 over the 10 years, a bit high, but reasonable. We borrowed that. So that puts at about 5 trillion shillings. That is our public debt. But when you go to the repayment structure, you find that we have paid 8 trillion. We have repaid our debt by 8 trillion over the last 8 years. Our repayment of debt is 8 trillion. If we borrowed 5 trillion,
Who are we
we
paying?
have repaid 8 trillion.
What is
Factor in about 15%
Interest.
interest rate?
You'll find that we have paid 2.2 trillion
over
and above what we borrowed.
and still have a current debt of 13 trillion.
We have. I'm getting there.
Okay.
We have that 2.3 trillion that we have overpaid the debt by.
Yes.
Now, when you go to the Central Bank of Kenya records, they publish something called the weekly bulletin.
Yes.
When you look at the weekly bulletin that came out in December, giving us the data as per the last figures they had, they say we owe about 10.7 trillion. Okay? So here we have paid everything we owe in terms of the record, the proper record. Central Bank is saying we owe 10 trillion. So if I take the overpayment of the 2.3 trillion plus 10.7 trillion, I end up with a figure of 13 trillion as odious debt. Now, when I go back to compute the likes of the Eurobond and all these funny things that are borrowing outside the law, when I look at the statement, when I take the statement of revenue, the statement of actual revenue over the 10 years, and I also look at the budget that Parliament approved over the 10 years, and I subtract, I find that I can only account out of the 13 trillion, I can only trace 6.9 trillion in those figures. Another about 6.1 trillion is invisible, which means even the central bank is up to some mischief.
Let me ask, why do you say invisible?
Because you can't see where.
I can't see where it is. Central bank says our debt is 10 point 7 trillion. Okay? I've done the computation from what Parliament has approved and what was brought back. Interrogated whether the back date was odious or not. I've taken it as a fact because it happened before the new constitution.
Okay.
So I've come to 2014. And remember, the 2013, when Uhuru came in, the 2013-2014 budget was done by Mwai Kibaki.
Yes.
And largely influenced by the old culture. So we come from 2014, 2015. That's the budget I'm beginning to interrogate from, using the parameters in the constitution. And that's the time when also you get that the Eurobond has come in under Uhuru. Okay. You see, then I begin to interrogate these things to say, now what is going on? How does the, and when you look at our constitution in Article 229 Clause 6, it requires the Auditor General to audit government accounts for lawfulness and effectiveness.
Right.
So using that parameter, lawfulness and effectiveness, I now come to audit the government books, to look at the government books and say, this year it was like this year it was like that. That's when I come out and find that we have overpaid our debt by 2.37 trillion. Central Bank claims in their own weekly bulletin that the debt Kenya owes is 10.7 trillion, which means the entire 10.7 trillion is an odious debt because you've already overpaid our debt. So I take this 2.3 trillion, I add to the 10.7 trillion, I get 13,
which is
trillion.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is the money that is odious. Then I take that 13 trillion and I say, okay, can I trace this 13 trillion from the records of the Treasury? Now, in the records of the Treasury, we look at, you see the document we looked at, that statement of the monthly statement of actual revenue and net expenditure.
Yes.
I take that document over the 10 years, the various, I get the total. I go back and I take the document that the budgets that the government has, that the Parliament has approved.
Yes.
Then I do the mathematics. Then I find that of the 13 trillion, I can only trace 6.9 trillion in the odious debt.
Yes.
Because the Treasury records
Of
now,
the 13 trillion, only 6 trillion can be traced.
6.9.
So when you say trace, it means
It's
they went towards the functions for which they
No,
had.
it was
No,
borrowed.
it was
It was
borrowed.
actually
It was
borrowed.
borrowed illegally. It's an odious debt. The things I've been showing you when we began.
Of the 13 trillion.
Yes, I can see the 13 trillion. Like when you see that bump of 18 billion,
Yes.
it can be seen in the Treasury. That's a Treasury record. So when you get all those funny things, you find that they come to 6.9 trillion. Now, which means that 6.1 trillion of the 13 trillion is invisible. Now, that's when you need now to go back to the central bank and ask, na nyinyi, have you also been incurring debt in your own way, in your own books in a funny way? What has this money been doing?
Because essentially what we're saying here, Senator, is that if 6.1 trillion shillings had been spent, if it had been appropriated, if it had been tagged onto something, you would see it.
Yeah.
That's where the effectiveness part comes
In.
Yes.
You would see it. You would
the
see these
impact of it.
numbers. Yeah.
Yes. But here it touches on the lawfulness of it because, first of all, how on earth did you go about getting this money?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because remember, the law of the land as well says anytime you borrow, it is tied to a specific project.
Yes,
But
it
here
is.
we have,
It has to be.
Yes.
Well,
but
beyond that, we're saying that
Yes.
in order for you to borrow,
Yes.
that it
Yeah.
should have a development project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't borrow otherwise.
Yes.
The simple law is this. For your daily expenditure, you want to pay salaries, you want to eat, you want to do whatever, the law says you must finance from your taxes.
Yes.
Cut your suit according to the
your
cloth.
cloth.
Yes.
You see. But should you want to develop, because the development means you'll be generating income later, you are allowed now to borrow for capital, for asset acquisition. Yeah. So, but for these transactional things, you have to, that's your issue. And even repaying the debt is considered a recurrent expenditure. So it's not, you cannot borrow to pay a debt. The way President Ruto purported to claim that he borrowed a
The
Eurobond
buyback.
to pay a Eurobond. You
Yes.
can't do that.
Yeah.
I want us to look into the details of Eurobond and what exactly it means. It's a term that we throw about every now and then. We'll do that in just a while, but let's look at that from what the naked eye can see. I keep asking this question, that let's not even talk about 6.1 trillion shillings, Senator. Let's say 1 trillion shillings. If you were to put 1 trillion shillings into the development agenda in any sector in this country, as the naked eye would see, would you not see or feel the effect of 1 trillion shillings in development in the country?
You could have seen that. And in fact, the whole picture, if you use that standard, the whole picture, that's, I think you are invoking at section 15, clause 2, paragraph C of the Public Finance Management Act, which says that government borrowings shall be used only for the purpose of financing development expenditure and not for recurrent expenditure. And then it goes on to define development expenditure as acquisition or replacement of assets. You see. So when you come there now, when you take the global picture, and that's, I think, if you look at my paragraph 16 on page 5, if you look at paragraph 16 on page 5, you find something very, very interesting to find when you now look at these things in terms of effectiveness.
Yeah.
So you find that we have spent 22 trillion shillings over that period, being 17 trillion in loans, 4 trillion in tax on development, purportedly. That means that in every year, if you divide that over the years, 22 divided by 10, you find that you have been spending 2.2 trillion on development.
And would you not see, if truly that was the case, according to these numbers, that's what it would mean, Senator. But if we were actually spending 2.2 trillion shillings every year on development, we would be at, Kenya would by now have fantastic infrastructure.
And now look at the paragraph 18. That would be, would have given us 35 SGRs.
Yes.
22 trillion would mean Kenya would have built 35 SGR railways.
I think even when you talk about just 1 trillion that you're talking about, you're talking about 3 SGRs fully complete.
Every year. You see.
At the price that we're told it
at that price, which already was inflated.
Using 500 billion. So this is how people are playing around with this country. And that's why when we go forward, we must fix our finances.
Why do I get the impression this is a very rich country?
No, it's
Jermaine, 2.2 trillion shillings you're spending on infrastructure development every year. You're very rich. The question then, before I wanted to, because in the next hour we'll be looking at the Eurobond now, because this is money that Kenya owes. 117 billion shillings is owed in a couple of years, and it's actually months when you look at it, and then graduated thereafter in terms of what the Eurobond actually means. But then there's the question of what the Auditor General flags over and over and over and over again and says effectiveness, lawfulness has not been adhered to. Why do the flags that the Auditor General hoists all the time, why are these not adhered to?
Because the Auditor General violates the Constitution.
She does?
There's this document I shared. Maybe if you can get that paper where she was saying commercial banks have... there's a newspaper article that I shared.
Yes.
I don't know if you have it, you can display it.
We do. We'll share it in the beginning of the next hour.
What I'm saying is that the Auditor General is supposed to audit for effectiveness, for lawfulness and effectiveness. She never does that. If you look at the Auditor General reports, it always concludes that we cannot tell. We cannot tell. We cannot tell. And you see, an audit report is supposed to be a complete document.
It should be conclusive.
Yes. It should be conclusive. So the Auditor General chooses to be vague.
Let's take a break on that point and come back with what this vagueness actually then essentially would mean. The senator from Busia County says that the reports coming in from the Auditor General are vague and that she's actually violating the Constitution in regard to some of these numbers that we are talking about. It's an odious debt conversation that we're having this morning, and we'll come back after and continue with the good senator. Good morning. It's 8 a.m.